I got it.
You got
There you
it.
go.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
You can start.
Okay. Single sign-on 101, beyond the hype. So it's not just an introduction to single sign-on in general, but it's also to give you guys an idea of what single sign-on can and can't do, because a lot of times people hear about single sign-on and they think, yay, this is going to be the best thing in the world. It's terrific. It's going to solve all my problems. And, you know, as with any technology, it does certain things. It doesn't do other things. And a lot of implementations can get damaged by misaligned expectations. So this is really to just help get all those expectations in line as you're going forward with your plans.
And just to make sure, since we're at the beginning of the session and you have a chance to run away screaming, we are going to talk technically, but we're not going to dismember any of the single sign-on systems or hack anything. So if that was what you were expecting, it's probably time for you to go. Or you can stay and then complain afterwards. That's fine too.
So you already know, I'm Diana Kelly. I work with a group, Rudy Group. I have 12 years of security networking experience and designing secure systems. And I used to co-own a security consulting business with this man.
Yeah, my name's Poynter, and I'm currently an independent security consultant, which is a good way of saying that I'm speaking at conferences and doing things that I actually like to do instead of things that someone else wants me to do. Before that, I owned a security consulting company. So I've been doing this for about the same length of time as Diana.
What we're going to do is we're going to cover some definitions about SSO, what it is, then go through the business requirements, what you should be thinking about for your business. Why in the heck are you installing this other than you know, that you were told to? Go through the technologies. We're going to match them up with the vendors so you can get an idea which vendors provide what, cover some authentication methods, and then just do two quick case studies to show you how two different companies solved their SSO problems.
I think we actually have a small enough audience, I think, that if you have a burning question that you want to ask as we go along, wave your hands in the air because we can probably see everybody. Otherwise, we'll take questions at the end because it's going to be hitting up against lunch and there are probably going to be people eating their feet off. So whenever you're ready. Okay, so what is single sign-on? Well, part of the problem with single sign-on is the same problem that we've had with VPN, or pick your favorite acronym, is that it's always been the thing that's going to solve everybody's problems, do everything, make the tea, save the whales. Single sign-on is the blissful fantasy that there's, in some sense, one password for everything, and that somehow you won't have to deal with multiple systems, and everything will just happily happen, and everything will be lovely. The reality of it is that a lot of systems that people are using when you're not building, even when you are building something from the ground up, but especially when you're not, are using a lot of different authentication mechanisms. Some of them aren't ones that you're happy with. They all work differently. They all have different criteria for what's a good password, what isn't, how long it's supposed to be, any number of other things. Generally, when people think of single sign-on, they're thinking of one of two things. They're either thinking of reducing the number of times they have to log in, or they're thinking of reducing the problems that come with having lots of different passwords on lots of different systems. So the fantasy is probably never really going to happen. There are a lot of people that would like to sell you products that they think are going to make it happen. But in reality, there's always something that doesn't quite fit into what you're doing.
Right, but you can really get a good reality of it. If you stop thinking single sign-on for everything that you touch in your organization, including those people that want to have cards that get you onto the network and into the office building physically, you can have reduced logon. It's very real. People are doing it, and for certain applications, as long as you understand what you can put into your reduced logon reality, then that's definitely someplace that you can plan for and go very successfully, and there are a lot of reasons to do that. These are the reasons that you'd want to go with SSO. Some people then also, the other side of it is, well, what is it? Do I really need it? Yeah, you probably need to look at some sort of reduction of passwords. I mean, it's like passwords are like mushrooms. How many passwords does anyone have? There's an average of 11 in most enterprises at this point. People get desperate. They have to get on. They have to remember their passwords. So what do? They start reusing the same password over and over and over again. How many people here have absolutely no duplicate passwords in their life? Okay, that's
Yeah, in an audience like this, you'd expect at least a couple, but even in an audience like this, you're not going to find many people that have absolutely no duplicate passwords.
Yeah, but we do audits in companies, and it's amazing how often you can just flip up a keyboard, look at the terminal, and see the sticky note password cache. That's where a lot of people are storing their passwords, right out in full sight. Another thing people do is they just store them, they need to keep their password somewhere, so they have a text file on their laptop or their PDA. And that's where they store it. But these are very, very easy things to get. I was actually on a plane once next to somebody who, what he'd done is he'd done a yellow sticky note, and it was on his screen. But then he had taped a little yellow flap over it, so he had to pick it up and look underneath. So there was his high-tech security.
So, like I was saying, Bill, I was hinting at before, single sign-on is deceptively intuitive. It's one of these things, and actually that can cause a problem if you're a technology person that's dealing with business people, that seems really easy. And the things that seem really easy are always the ones that, they're really easy to explain, and maybe they're really easy to get someone to sign a purchase request for before you've even met the salesman. Any number of other things, but they're actually not, pretty much nothing in security is as simple as it seems. And single sign-on is no exception. There are a lot of things that you can do in some circumstances. You can reduce costs. You can sometimes, but not always, increase security. Efficiency, certainly, if you're really doing something that's single sign-on. You log in once, you don't log in anymore. For the people that are using that, that's a really good thing. It's more convenient. And then, of course, there's the usual reason my boss told me I had to do it. He read it in the Wall Street Journal School of Management. There's this thing called single sign-on, and we really need to have it. Could you go out and get one? That's why I picked on VPN before, because I've heard that, actually literally heard that with VPN. We're getting one because we were told we had to have one. So.
Yeah, I did quite a number of PKI installations for the same reason. Somebody heard about it. Okay. That's great. So that seems really easy. You're told to get the SSO. Go ahead, go run, do it right now. But before you do that, and there are a lot of implementations, before you do that, please stop your bosses or stop the people that are paying the checks and telling you to do that and say, let's really get honest here. And number one, when you do any implementation of any security technology, you want to do a cost-benefit analysis. You really want to say, how much am I spending and how much and what am I going to get? And you need to bring it down to hard numbers. This is one of the hardest things of a security implementation, of any kind of security implementation, not just SSO, to understand what you're doing and why. So get some hard numbers, good things to look at. How much does it cost your company to reset passwords? If you're a small company and you only have a small number of systems, it may not be very expensive. If you're the kind of company that is servicing, hundreds of thousands of customers, say if you're a Fidelity or a Merrill Lynch or brokerage house, it can cost you up to $25, $30 per password reset. So take a look at those numbers and see what they are for you. How much time are people wasting? Some very large companies will have literally a 20-minute log-on cycle in the morning. There are large organizations where they actually log people on automatically before they get to their desk, because it would take them too long to start their work if they didn't. So that's a big savings. If you've got some kind of mess like that in your company, you really could benefit from looking at SSO technology. What is the real cost of integration? Nothing is just, flip the switch and it's on. That's what all the vendors want to think, and they try to deliver that for a product, but the reality is you've got an integration cost, and you've got to figure out how much that's gonna add on to the overall project. And then finally, is this going to be a time when additional authentication methods are going to be used? Because if you have been trying to go to a more N-factor, multi-factor authentication method and you haven't been able to up until now, if this is going to bring you there and it's something that you're doing for regulatory requirements or increased security, that could be a big savings and a big benefit for you. So that's another number to really take a close look at.
And of course, I was hinting before at ease of use. When you've got a 20-minute log-on cycle, or when you've got a lot of disparate systems, which tends to happen in some organizations rather than others, increasing ease of use does increase efficiency. It doesn't necessarily always increase security, but it is a reason that people install SSO tools. So there's not just a security thing flying around here. It's not a clear-cut decision. And people always forget to take into account how much testing they're going to need to do, the upgrades they're going to need to do, the inevitable thing that doesn't work that you have to have the vendor work on, any number of other things, and that really increases the total cost of ownership of these things. But I mean, this is that's sort of motherhood and apple pie for dealing with any kind of technology, but it very often gets overlooked.
Yeah, always good to remember that. I talked a little bit about you may be an enterprise with a small number of people, or you may be a big brokerage house that's got a lot of customers out there. Do you think about the inside and the outside as you're looking at what the benefits of going to an SSO are going to be? Because again, those end users that are your customers or your clients that don't actually work for you, you don't have any control over how, you may not have any control over people inside, but you really don't have much control over the people that are outside your organization, how technical they are, what they're going to be able to do. So really look at what's the difference there. Also with the tiered authentication levels, be realistic. If somebody's connecting to you from an outside, if they're a partner, that kind of thing, you may not be able to say you have to have a token, you have to have a biometric, that sort of thing. And also you're going to need to take into account the training, at least secure password management training for everybody.
And usually,
I'm sorry. And on the outside, that could really be something as simple as a screen that comes up while people are learning to use your system. But you are going to have to do something for everybody so they get a clue about what they're supposed to do. And also how to pick secure passwords, things like that. That'll save you a lot of money on the back end.
So then on to the next stage of these things, which is always what are the risks, what are the business risks. This actually, again, is something that in our experience gets overlooked. People look at the requirements or they look at what it is they're trying to achieve, but they don't actually say, well, what other problems are going to come along? Of course, with some of these systems, depending on how they're architected, actually more of them than you would like, there is now a single point of failure, which is very handy if you're trying to break in, because once you've got through the front end, you're into everything, which is nice if that's what you're trying to do. Stolen credentials, again, some people will write their one password on a sticky note, and the whole thing then goes to hell. So, there are human factors here, and there are things here that are outside the control of the software itself. Insecure implementations, different implementations do things in different ways. It pays to dig when you're looking at SSO products to find out what they actually do under the hood. Because some of them seem really secure, and then they're actually just sort of dishing passwords in clear text across the network still, because that's the only way they can do something. So you need to understand what it is you're trading one thing for another. And generally beware of overly ambitious projects. It's easier to make something like this fail if you make it fail big by trying to do everything at once. I'm very shocked, actually, how few, even quite large companies, really do serious pilot projects of things. And it usually pays big dividends. So this is sort of motherhood again. But
a big thing I saw a lot with PKI, I see a lot now with the SSO is, people forget all about the legacy, and there is a legacy, especially in large companies. You've got the old client server applications. They're still there. They've got their own login mechanism. You've got your mainframe. There's still a lot of blue iron out in the world, as well as the mid-size, the AS400s. You have to understand that it's not all a web-based solution. So if you're coming to that from, if your vendor's saying, hey, it's all for the web, that's not it. Even some of your custom web applications, they've got their own login mechanisms quite likely. So you have to take all of that into account. The other thing that people often overlook when they're going with the SSO is what they may be under, what kind of guns are over their heads. And that doesn't just mean that the business requirements within their own company, but also, what do they have to do in terms of regulations. So GLBA is financial services, it's Gramm-Leach-Bliley, and it refers to privacy and sharing information in financial organizations. Healthcare has HIPAA, which probably all been beaten to death with the HIPAA stick, but it's for portability and accountability in medical records. And it has very stiff penalties associated with it if you haven't adhered to the privacy, the security regulations. Content providers have COPPA, protect the children, and international businesses are under the jurisdiction of the European Commission and the Union's Data Protection Directive. And again, they are regulating, they are out there, and they are charging fees. And you may say, hey, we're America, who cares about Europe? If you're changing over information with Europe, you come under the laws of the EU. So you do have to think about that. So as you're looking at us, I'm going to say, well, what does SSO have to do with the data protection? It does, because it's how people are signing on and getting to information. And if you haven't protected it properly or picked an SSO implementation that isn't going to secure you according to the regulations, you could be liable of the.
So what we're going to do now that we've covered sort of the first pass of business, What we're going to do now is take a look at the different authentication methods that you run across that are or aren't compatible with various systems. Then we're also going to look at the general classes of SSO products that are out there and give you some examples and talk about some of their strengths and weaknesses. And then we'll move on to some case studies. So we're going to start with authentication. I doubt there are very many people in here that haven't heard this all before, but I'm going to say it anyway. Authentication methods. We want to declare and prove who and what we are. We want to know what people are going to have access to. We want to be able to control them. They're signing on once in an SSO, but what with? Someone has to make a decision at some level whether we're going to stick with traditional username password or if we're going to do something else. This becomes a lot more of a tricky question because the SSO is taking this single front end, this happy, I'm using my token card to log in, and under the hood it's doing something else to interact with all these legacy systems. And that may not necessarily involve the token card at all, so there may be just a sort of a displacement of authentication. So there could be a lot of different authentication mechanisms going on under the hood.
Yeah, the tradition, most authentication that almost everybody uses, everybody's using a username and a password, so everybody's familiar with that. There are some other form factors of authentication, and it goes under, the have, no, are, and what you have, like a card or a token, what you know, your password, what you are would be a biometric, your fingerprint. You can take these either individually, you could just ask for one authentication method, or for higher level, higher value transactions or access to data that's of more value to your company, you may want to start layering on those authentication methods and say, well, I want a token and a password, or I want a biometric and a password, or I want 4 biometrics and a password. So you can start to really increase and tier the way that you're handling your authentication.
Then we've got the usual slew of different ways that you could perform an authentication. A password, one-time passwords, which could be in software, tokens and smart cards. Some of the tokens do one-time passwords, but in hardware. Smart cards tend to have something on them. Generally, I don't know, you're seeing more of those now. You see more of them outside the US than you do inside the US. PKI, I'm not even going to go there. PKI is one of those old sores that just keeps popping up. Digital or machine fingerprints, where it's your actual laptop that you just plugged in that has something on it, not just a MAC address, but something else on it that says, I'm this laptop. So assuming it hasn't been stolen. And biometrics. Biometrics is another can of worms I'm not going to touch, although I'd be happy to wax lyrical about it later to anyone who wants to while we're drinking. It's one of those things that we're not going to be able to get away from, but it's got a lot of interesting issues.
I think there's a talk here about that where they're going to, I'm sure, go into really sordid detail. Yeah, and it's sometimes people have a little hard time understanding why they'd want to go with multi-factor authentication, but it can very much be a business benefit for you. For example, in the case of smart cards, you may get somebody who can get access physically into their place of business, into the building, and then use that same card to go on the network. There are a lot of reasons that could be very attractive to some companies. Also, things like the digital fingerprint, again, back to that, if you've got roaming users, it's great to know that that's a laptop that you approve on your system. That's telling you a lot more than just a password. Anybody can steal a password. Stealing a laptop takes a little bit more time. So there are real reasons to do N-factor authentication.
Then we've got the usual collection, again, of authentication mechanisms. We just came from a talk on 802.1x, which has radius under the hood to a certain extent in some of its implementations, at least what's out there right now. Then there are the Big Blue or Big Blue clone mainframes with RACF and all of the rest of that. Unix. Well, Unix has always had its login and its password. There are pluggable authentication modules now that give you some flexibility. There's the usual thing there. And Windows has the Windows things. Older versions of Windows, you can replace the Gino, which is the login DLL. Newer versions of Windows have a Kerberos hybrid. I was trying to think of a polite way of saying what I was actually thinking. And NTLM and a bunch of other things. But all of these things are all of these things are proprietary on some level to various different systems, and the goal of the SSO is, or the goal if you're choosing an SSO or evaluating them, is to find one that will plug into all the things that you're going to use in a way that's going to make it easy for you to use.
Right. The purpose of this slide wasn't to give you a lot of letter soup. The purpose was to get you thinking about these are the things that are in legacies that may well be within your organization. So if you've been tasked to go out and do the RFP for somebody coming in and you know, deploying an SSO for you, you need to take a look at all the stuff within your organization, and these are some of the things to look at for how people are coming in and what authentication they need supported. Okay, the specific technologies. SSO actually comes in a few different flavors, as well as authentication SSO does too. There's a traditional, then there's password synchronization. We're going to go into these in depth. They're the platformers, and the new one are the logon aggregators. That's what I'm calling them. There's not a real standard note for it. A lot of the traditional SSO is merging with authentication platforms. You'll see that as we go through. So we're really getting a hybrid. A lot of people that have worked with firewalls for a long time. I don't know, does anybody remember the whole MLSI debate versus proxy inspection, data inspection? No? Okay, well, the firewall manufacturers used to sling so much mud and dirt at each other over which technology was better, and then ultimately all of the firewalls just ended up doing both. And that's essentially where I think the traditional SSO and the authentication platforms are going to go.
So the traditional single sign-on, this is usually what somebody has in their mind if they've any idea what SSO is where you log in once using a single mechanism. Maybe it's multi-factor, but you log in once. And then after that, you're logged in automatically to everything else. So you sit down at your desk in the morning, you log in, any system you go to, then you're logged in, you don't have to worry about it. Some of them provide access control and authentication features too, depending on how they're managing the credentials behind the scene, so that when you log in, you're identified as someone who's in marketing, but you're allowed to read this one sales report or whatever, and then that's mapped somehow onto the systems underneath. Generally, these systems are the simplest conceptually in some sense. I think it's easier to get your head around this. It's certainly easier to get management head around this than it is around some of the other things that we're going to talk about. Maybe.
Yeah.
And they're all merging together, so it makes it a little more confusing anyway.
Single sign-on is not a new concept. It's been around for a long time. Kerberos has been around for a very long time, and it's now embedded into the Microsoft authentication. And then Radius as well has been around for a bit of also for a long time. And I put radiized and Kerberized up there because Radius in and of itself is a remote dial-in protocol, but there are companies out there that have actually made a single sign-on through Radius by, quote, radiizing all their applications. What they do is they wrap around the application so it accepts the authentication that speaks Radius, even though it doesn't do this natively. So there have been companies that have been out there trying to build these on their own for a while, and this is not, just totally brand new. How it works is that you, again, authenticate once to access many. Usually what happens for a traditional SSO is that all those credentials are stored locally. In the very, very simplest SSOs, what you'll find is a script, a script with usernames and passwords that just keep getting pumped out to all of the different applications that are asking for them. Sometimes in an unencrypted text file in the script. I mean, it can be very scary when you see how some people have done this, but that's essentially the concept, is I'm just going to hold on to all of your IDs and then transparently to you so you don't see what I'm doing. Whenever an application comes up and asks for a credential, I'll just shove it off to it, silently, so you don't have to worry about it.
Then under the hood, these systems are either more or less invasive in terms of how integrated they have to be. Diana was talking about Kerberos before. Kerberos wants its applications to be Kerberized, and they need to know that they're dealing with Kerberos. So then everything is a single credential for all systems, and each application that you're dealing with knows that it's got to often talk to someone to find out whether you're allowed in or not. Generally, in a heterogeneous environment where you're trying to build something on top of what's already there, you end up with multiple credentials where you're logging in using one set of credentials, which then, from mechanisms varying, like Diana was saying, from as simple as text files with scripts in, to servers on the back end that are managing everything, somehow that identity gets mapped into the appropriate identity on the other systems. And there are different ways in which that happens. Even if you're doing the whole thing with usernames and passwords, there potentially, depending on the system, could be mapping your username to a different username for every system and a different password for every system, and updating your client every night with a new list of passwords. So your password doesn't change, but the ones on the back end do. So there are all kinds of things that can go on under the hood, but generally that's the multiple system. And if you're dealing with a lot of different stuff, you're going to end up dealing with a system that uses multiple credentials, whether you want to or not. Did you go one too far?
I did, and I don't know.
What are you missing?
You keep talking.
I'll keep talking, okay. How they work, sometimes there are APIs like with Kerberos. With Windows, there's a DLL that can get replaced, although in some circumstances it doesn't quite work the way you're expecting it to. There are scripts that contain things underneath, which can be very simple or very complex. For web applications, there are cookies, and we're actually going to come back to the web aggregation systems a little bit later. But cookies get quite a torturing sometimes, but in some circumstances they do what you want them to do in the way that you want them to do it. So there are a lot of systems out there that are using cookies whether they should be or not.
Yeah, that's true. Pros and cons, good and bad and everything. At traditional SSO, it's really easy to use. So you really, when it's implemented correctly, you do get this one, hey, you log in once, that's it, go off. Can reduce your support costs, because if you have a lot of high-priced resets of passwords, having a single password is going to save you some money. And it can really shut down the login cycle and keep it, since it's going on under the covers, it can be much quicker for people. I mean, there really is a lot of time wasted to, I'm logging in here, I'm logging in there, I'm typing, trying to remember this password, I'm looking it up. The cons, really the integration with the legacy, people tend to just, gloss this over, but if you've been told to do SSO for a lot of legacy systems, that's going to be what gets you. That's going to take all your time. It's very difficult to get that right. So don't kid yourself on that one. It can be a single point of attack. I just need to know that one password to get onto all the other systems. Hey, that's changed. In some ways, having multiple passwords, even though it's difficult and can be very clunky and time-consuming for your users, it's offering you some protection too, in some ways. So now I just know one password, I can get onto that all the other systems with it. And the scripting solutions that do store the passwords on the client side are just very, very insecure, and for most companies really shouldn't be used. Anything that needs high value shouldn't be using anything that's storing a password unencrypted on a client.
So these things, I mean, it's fairly obvious from the way we've been describing them that they're a good fit when you want to simplify the user's experience. They're a good fit usually when you're trying to reduce the amount of time people take to log in. Whether they're a good fit to match other criteria that you have somewhat depends on the product. But these are things that are clear advantages, at least, from using a system that does this.
Right, and the big guys, and you'll notice that the second two very, very much also the authorization. The big guys, IBM Tivoli, and the most well-known, I think, traditional SSOs are the NetTegrity SiteMinder product, and what's now RSA ClearTrust, but was originally Securant, so you may remember it by that name. These are very traditional SSO. They do have some support for legacy, but basically if you can radialize things, that would be better because they have strong radius support. And they both have authorization as well. So there's a whole concept now of taking both the authentication and the authorization and abstracting that layer out of your network. And these do support that kind of a model.
And I'll just make one comment in passing that this isn't necessarily an exhaustive list. There are a lot of other little bits and pieces out there. And with these products all sort of stealing different kinds of things from these general technology areas, you might see the names come up twice, or they maybe should have been there twice. It pays to really look under the hood of these products when you're evaluating them, because they all do little bits of all the other things.
Right.
SiteMinder, for example, has most of its background in doing, a web front end for people protecting websites. So there's no clear-cut distinctions in this market anymore, and there probably won't be for some time.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, if you're going to go forward with this is sort of the concept of, do you want to go forward with SSO? If you walk out of here and you want to go forward with SSO, then you should go to an SSO 202, where you really start to dig under the covers on these technologies so that you can start matching up even better for your company. Password synchronization. And we would do that, but we don't have the time for all of this. So password synchronization. This is an interesting one. A lot of people think password synchronization is actually an SSO, but really what it is it's just passwords across multiple platforms and applications get reset to be the same so that you only have to remember a single password. So you keep logging in, but you only have to remember that one password. So, it does help with that whole spaghetti of, the sticky pad with 12 different passwords on there.
In some ways, these are fairly conceptually simple too. They're not reducing the amount of time it takes you to log in on your 25 different systems. But if you change the password using a mechanism that the password synchronization system provides, magically your password is the same everywhere. There are a lot of interesting potential problems with this because of the requirements that underlying systems have with passwords, but that's the general overview. Sometimes they're distributed, so agents are resetting passwords sort of automatically by checking in or whatever else. Sometimes they're centralized, and each system in your environment talks to an authentication server, which provides a very convenient single point of failure. The authentication server contains all of the password information, or whatever it is, maybe it's even its tokens or whatever, and each application goes to that system every time it needs an authentication. So they're subtly different. They both have their problems. But that's basically the concept here, is just to avoid the problem of having to remember multiple passwords.
Yeah, and something that Ian touched on before, but again, it makes sense to look at. If your application is sending the password back and forth in the clear, then even if you go to something like this and it says, well, the password is being secured down to the client or whatever's on the machine, that's fine, but it's still probably talking to the application on the back end in the clear. So this isn't going to solve that problem for you. So if that's one of your problems, which with a lot of companies it is, certainly with older legacy systems, passwords are flying in the clear all the time. Then keep that in mind, that you're not going to solve that problem with this most of the time.
It's another one of those interesting questions to ask salespeople. They say, oh, it's so much more secure than it used to be. And you say, well, don't the old passwords go over the wire anyway? Usually they don't have an answer to that kind of question. It's always good to have at least one of those. Okay. So that's the freebie for today. Generally, like I was saying before, the user only has to remember one password, so that's actually kind of nice. These are usually fairly easy to do because they're really only doing one simple thing, which is when you change your password, they're splattering it across all the systems. So there's one simple conceptual thing to be done. The help desk, if you're using a help desk to reset passwords, they can just reset one password when you forget it. So they don't have to run around to 25 different systems trying to find out which of the passwords you can actually remember.
In addition to the cost and the usage savings there, you also have a security savings too, because a lot of times when somebody leaves a company, they probably have 12 different accounts or 10 different accounts, whatever. I like 12 today for some reason. They leave the company, you have to shut down their accounts everywhere. Well, very often, one of those accounts is left open, whether it's the dial-in or whether it's their access to their email, which they can get over the web. You probably forgot to shut down one of the accounts because there are so many of them to remember. So with something like this, then boom, you've got it all. You just change that password and it's on all the systems, and then you can go and in more leisurely time make sure that they're deleted on all the systems, the user itself.
So this mechanism doesn't reduce the number of logins. You're still logging in 25 times, but at least you're using the same password. And most of what's out there only supports password authentication. Realistically, the only way you could support something that wasn't is probably having everything go back to an authentication server, and then you're back to the single point of failure. So again, it's another case for looking under the hood to see whether what it is you're looking at, what it's actually doing. And it's unfortunate that you can't buy a magic bullet of SSO, but it's probably no surprise to most of you.
Yep. It's a good technology, and it's going to solve the problem for certain companies. If you have just a few different systems, just a few different passwords, you have no need for any other authentication, you're not looking for authorization, you're okay with this, then this would be a good place for a good company for this technology. It's also if you don't have a huge, very long login cycle, so you don't mind that people are going again and again to do the actual logon. So for the brands, this is a funny one. Passco InSync was its own company, and they got purchased by Accent, who got purchased by Symantec, and then Symantec decided that they were going to clean out their portfolio so they could spend all that money that they did with $350 million billion dollars, million? million.
I don't know.
Million, 315 billion, that they spent a couple weeks ago to buy things like Security Focus. But they've now shunned off Pasco, and it's back out on its own. This is one of the first and one of the most well-known password synchronization products out there. There's also the Korean Password Courier, which is a very well-known and strongly deployed product.
And I have to say, at least, that a couple of people that I know who have these kinds of systems love them to death. But I don't know all that many people who are like thrilled to death with them. But there were organizations where there were traditionally lots of problems with logging into different things and users calling up all the time. Put something like this in and actually get a benefit from it right away, which is unusual.
Yeah, and before Novell got its acting gear, and even with different Microsofts, depending on your deployment, something like this could be real. I mean, there was a time when you had to go and reset a user's password on every damn Novell server, and it was just it was a big drag. So, they do help in a situation like that.
So moving on, this is sort of going up a level in some ways, I suppose you could say, to the authentication platforms that are providing a central point of management for multiple authentication schemes. Users authenticate to some kind of gateway, which, in some ways, again, there's overlap with some of the things we were talking about. Usually, although not always, depending on the deployment, they're going to authenticate with a smart card or with a token card or with something. And you can have multiple layer authentication policies where different kinds of authentication are needed for different kinds of people doing different kinds of things. So the idea here is to provide like it says, to provide a platform to manage authentication across the organization.
Yeah, I mean, this was really born out of companies saying, geez, I want to use a password here, I want to use a biometric over here, I want to use a token card for this, and now I've got all these little atomic logins and username and password databases, and then I can't get them all together, and I don't know how to join together my smart card authentication with my regular password authentication. So everything is very discrete. There's no event correlation. I don't have a way to forensically track things in one place. And so and it was driving a lot of people from going forward with another form of authentication, like even a PKI. So the authentication platform people said, hey, look, you need one place where you can get it all in one area and just plug everything else in, and we'll do the management for you. It's nice in that it does abstract that layer away from each individual system out to a gateway. So the users they know the gateway, they go there, and then the gateway handles the rest of it. The gateway also can determine what level of authentication is available. So if you want to have most of your users coming in with passwords because they're only going to go to a certain area within that application or within that network, but you want to have other users and force them to use multiple factors of authentication, you can set that up on the gateway, and they will not be able to get in without, that enforcement.
So back with the pros and cons again. Because of the abstraction, it sort of eases the whole process conceptually. Different things, again, are going on under the hood. You can, from these systems, get support for a lot of different kinds of authentication tools. So that can be a factor if you're looking to mix and match and try and have some people using something more secure than other people, maybe even to manage the authentication credentials for the vast stream of consultants that at least used to be going through people's organizations before the stock market tanked. So, there are a lot of transient users, there are a lot of mobile users from other offices, any of that kind of stuff. This is it's made easier. Doesn't reduce the number of logins, but some of the technologies incorporate what we were calling traditional SSO to give you that as well. So you may get something that's an authentication platform, but it provides single sign-on in the sense that we were talking about before. So depending on the implementation, you may or may not reduce the number of logins. And of course, there are single point of attack, single point of failure, denial of service problems. So you have to think carefully about how you're actually designing the infrastructure and the architecture of these things behind the scenes to try and minimize the likelihood that you're going to end up with a mess.
Yeah, and to go back to single point of attack, I mean, think about it. You've got a gateway that is now brokering every single person trying to get to any application or any system on your network. So if somebody goes against that gateway, they can even just slather it with a lot of requests, and then it'll go pause up in the air and not be able to answer any request. That means you've cut everybody out of every system that it's covering. That's a pretty big denial of service, and that can really disrupt your organization. So you want to think carefully about if you're going to go with one gateway that's going to broker all those connections, then saying, okay, what happens if it isn't protected? What happens if it goes paws up? What about the redundancy to make sure that you have the business continuity within your network?
So who are these systems a good fit for? Again, I mean, the fit depends to a certain extent on the underlying product. Enterprises that have hierarchical complex systems with authentication requirements similar to the ones we were talking about before, where everything is all over the place, you want to have a lot of mix and match, you want a lot of complexity, you need a system that's going to be able to handle the complexity in a way that's going to be manageable. Companies that want to use N-factor authentication, generally, you obviously got to have something that's going to support it and that's going to support the kind of authentication you're planning to use. And these products tend to go further in that direction. And people with regulations over their heads, very often, a system like this, because it's a single point, can provide you with a really nice audit trail of who did what, where, when, what kind of authentication they used, and was it in compliance with the restrictions that you have placed on you externally. So, did the I don't know, what's a good topical example? Did the financial auditors, were they the only ones who had access to the books? It doesn't solve the problem of whether you know what they were actually doing with the books while they had them, but at least it solves the problem that you can say, well, yes, only Fred, Joe, and Jane had access to this, and the way we've got our system set up, it's not possible for anyone else to do that, and here are the logs, and here's how we have them stored so that they couldn't come in and change them. So there are some benefits in areas where you need to be able to prove what you're doing in a certain way. Of course, it doesn't say anything about what they were doing once they actually got in. And that's a whole different set of things.
Yeah, that's different. But yeah, also in healthcare, a lot of times it's more important to know what machine the data is coming from or going to than it is who's actually logged in. You may have a nurse's station where many people have to go up to it and use it, and they can't all take the time to log in. They're very busy, so they just want to know physically that machine is the expected machine. Unfortunately, most of the applications that they're talking to don't have any way to understand authentication of a machine. They're just doing an authentication of a password. So an authentication platform like this helps you to mix and match how you can authenticate within the organization.
And then again, a laundry list of some things that are mostly in this market with overlap into the others. There's biometrics. And Novell, finally, they got something that fits the bill. And ActiveCard, the technology they have used to be Ankari.
The biometric story is an interesting one. You can probably tell from their name that they didn't start out as just an authentication platform. They probably started out as a biometric platform, which is what they did. And as they were going out into the community, they did find out that a couple things were going on. One, people really weren't employing biometrics the way that they had hoped, or the way that many analysts had predicted. The other thing that was going on was that people were saying, my problems go beyond just adding the biometrics. My problem is really that I can't blend multiple authentications within my network and across the applications themselves. So that's why they moved on to doing the platform solution, and which is not to. An interesting thing about ActiveCard is that they did buy an SSO. They said, well, this is an interesting solution, but people are now saying, geez, I have all these different, I'm starting to get a hold of my authentication methods, and I'm feeling like, okay, maybe this is a little coordinated, but I'm still logging into all these different systems, and then that's a pain. So ActiveCard said, okay, let's buy an SSO, which they did, and they've actually wrapped that up into their authentication platform. And as we were saying earlier, watch for that convergence going forward within the different vendors, and also look, when you are going to do this, be aware, say, do I want to have both of those together in one solution? And if so, look for a vendor that can actually support all of your business requirements.
Now this kind of what we're calling SSO is probably something that most of you are familiar with on one level or another. These are web logon aggregators. They can be at a company level in the sense that I've got 10 websites. I'm Fidelity, I've got a bunch of different websites. You log in once and the credentials make it only to my websites. Or they can be at the global level in terms of the sorts of things that Microsoft have been trying to do with Passport or that Liberty Alliance are trying to do. So they run the gamut, but they're all web-based. They don't do anything else. Now the upside of that is that, especially when you're looking at outward-facing applications where you're dealing with customers outside of your organization, a lot of people are moving to web-based interfaces for everything. So these things actually have a much better fit now than they did 5 years ago because there are more things that are web accessible. The downside of them is that in a corporate environment, that may not necessarily be what you want. So they provide some but not all of what corporate environments may need, unless you've got a corporate environment that has gone to everything web-based, which I don't think most people would find completely practical.
Yeah, it's interesting, Netegrity, we talked about them up at the top in the traditional SSOs. Netegrity really came out to answer the problem of a company that had 10 different websites geographically distributed around the globe, and maybe some were IIS and some were Netscape, and that users had to keep, but they were all part of the same corporate intranet. Users had to keep logging in when they went to the separate systems. So Netegrity came out to answer that solution, and then they actually became more of a traditional going back into the enterprise and really starting to radiate in there. And what I do find very interesting in the market is that now we see companies that are saying, well, just the web might be okay. That might be enough for everything. And outside of the enterprise organization, it's to users that want to have an ease of use over the web. So you come on, you log into one place once, and all of a sudden, boom, you have access to all the other sites that you have to log into.
So the credentials to these things are either, when you log in, they're either cached locally in some kind of cookie. You log into Yahoo, that's what happens. It stuffs a cookie. They actually set time limits on their cookies and use other mechanisms so that you don't stay logged in forever. It still doesn't stop you from walking away from a terminal in the airport and leaving your Yahoo mail or whatever available. Same's true with Hotmail, these kinds of things. Or there's state on the server side, and since the web protocols are stateless, there's some hoop jumping that goes on, sometimes combined with cookies, to keep information about what you were doing last time you were here on the server so that you can get back where you were, so that you can come back up with the email that you were reading or whatever. And to a certain extent, where the information is stored, it has the same effect, but depending on what you're trying to do, one may be more advantageous than the other, or you may not care. And then once you go to another site, I go to another Yahoo site, I'm already logged in when I get there, because the cookies get delivered to that site. It says, oh yeah, you're already logged in, your time limit's not expired, so I'll show you your Yahoo calendar instead of someone else's, if you're lucky. And then everything is good.
So it's sort of like a blending and extension of the cookie concept. It's very easy to use. It's nice. And the other thing is also that with the passports, you can actually have things, the Microsoft Passport and what's coming up with the Liberty Alliance is looking at not just storing a username and password, but also storing other credentials about you, like your address, your age, your credit card information. If you've read what Microsoft's doing with Passport, they're storing this all at Microsoft servers, is the goal. But then when you go to purchase something, you don't have to give your credit card out again. You can just use the Passport mechanism, and it will automatically hand out your credit card information, so you don't have to keep filling it in and filling it in. MasterCard is also using a, quote, wallet-type solution to try and support this as a solution, so that it caches your information, and when it's requested on the website, boom, it comes up. The goal, and what everybody's trying to do, is if you shop, how many people shop at Amazon? Okay, yeah, I expected everybody. The goal is to really make every site you go to that streamlined experience of Amazon. Amazon has it because they have the market, so they can store your credit card information and do that one click. But the goal is that you can have that at Amazon, at BestBuy.com, at JCPenney.com, every place that you go to shop, or even a new site that you haven't been to before, to have it already stored securely for you.
I mean, needless to say, there are a lot of people that aren't particularly comfortable with this, and there were certainly a lot of people that weren't particularly comfortable with the idea of Microsoft, or quite honestly any large company, storing all that information about you in a conveniently stealable package. So there are pros and cons of these things. So we're looking at it right now just from the point of view of, technologically it sounds like a great idea. If, and it's a big if, all this stuff can be secured, and I can just wander around the web, and when I decide to buy something, I just buy it. That's going to make a lot more ordinary people that don't fight with computers every day of their lives. So I guess that's probably nobody. People that don't know how to fight with computers very well are just going to be able to sail from website to website buying a lot of stuff. So there are a lot of people that sell things that are salivating over the idea of making it really easy to buy. But there are a lot of other people, probably myself included, that are a little nervous about the idea of all these different companies having this information. Especially when it provides such a nice little neat package for identity theft.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you shop and your data is very, very important to a lot of people. There are companies out there that take your identifiable data and then just watch the way that you shop once they've been separated. This is really going to open that up, but there's going to be a real big connection back to who the person is. So I am looking at this. I do have some companies that have said they want to go to some sort of a weblog on aggregator where they go into one portal, they put their password in, and then they're actually logged into any other system that they might need to. With outsourcing, with the third parties, and I think it really is something that an enterprise needs to take a step back and look at. Is this within their security model? Can they outsource the trust? Does it make sense? Do you want Microsoft necessarily to have the passwords for your employees when they're going around on the web? Just a basic web log on aggregation, it is great for a company that's doing just a lot of web access. They're right there, right at the front end, all green fields, and that they want to just make things on the web easier for them. As we talked about, .NET, Passport, are really one of the big ones. The Liberty Alliance, they were founded by a group of folks that said, we don't know if we want Microsoft to have the whole web authentication, single sign-on solution here, so we're going to get together and have an alternative for the customer. They just released their first set of standards a couple of weeks ago, so they're out on the web. Something else that some people do confuse with SSO that you also may have heard of is account aggregation. Yodlee is a good example. Well, what they do is they will take all of your financial services account, so your bank account here, your trading account over at Ameritrade, your retirement account at Fidelity, and they'll log in for you and then aggregate it under one screen so that it's conveniently presented in one place. Again, real ease of use, but also very much an outsourcing of trust to a third party that you may want to consider.
And you can bet that over the next, it's been happening a lot over the last couple of years. You can bet that over the next couple of years, there's going to be a lot more of this kind of stuff. Privacy is one of those slippery and tricky things that it's like a bar of soap in the shower and suddenly it's gone. And when you pick it up, it's got big dents in it. And that's sort of been slowly happening over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's starting to pick up steam just because there's a critical mass there of people with interesting information. And I'm less concerned in some ways about some big company holding my credit card number because I'm only liable for $50, and actually in some cases I'm only liable for $0. So I don't really care so much about that. If it gets stolen, it's inconvenient. But I do care a lot more about what might be going on under the hood in terms of are they tracking everything I do in addition to everything that I'm buying? So is it a wallet of convenience for me, or is it a wallet of marketing information that will increase the size of the spam in my mailbox? I don't know. I mean, you can't really tell that. And it's very difficult for end users, for consumers, to assess this kind of stuff. So it actually presents a lot of interesting issues that are going to wash themselves out, probably with legislation over the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, and also back to the inside-outside thing. Remember, when you're inside and everybody that's using this mechanism belongs to you as in your enterprise, that's one thing. When you're dealing with external customers, you may be subject to different rules, and the EU in particular is extremely strict about how information is used and stored, and they have already gone after Microsoft over the .NET Passport because they're suspicious that it is in violation of the EU data directive. So it's an interesting thing to remember when you are creating your SSO. Are you going to be dealing with people outside your organization? It does change your model.
They interestingly also went after one of the airlines for storing preferences for meals and use of wheelchairs. Because it was, here it was perceived to be convenient that your record would say you're disabled and you need a kosher meal. In Europe, the whole idea that somebody could go onto a computer and find out that you needed a kosher meal and a wheelchair was a whole different can of worms because of a whole lot of different social experience. So there are very interesting issues when you start projecting this stuff outwards. And again, anyone who wants to come drink later can talk our heads off about it.
These are two actual architectures that I worked on and did do installations for. I did change some of the characteristics because they're clients. So, I can't give away the whole, but this does give you a real idea of how the project was founded, so that you can see how you might go about actually implementing your own SSO.
So this one is a large insurance company. Again, we're sort of going about this in the way that we've talked about how we think you should go about it. So
well, actually, not just that we think, but this is long, hard, but this is hard-earned experience. I've been doing implementations for a long time. Ian's been doing implementations. We've been burned. We don't want you guys to get burned. So this is a really good way to go about it, and a way to think about these projects before you actually start them.
The best way to not get burned...
roadmap for success.
The best way to not get burned is actually to know what you're doing before you start trying to do it, which is very uncommon in the computer industry, so it's always a good place to start.
No, wait, what and why? Why? Why are you doing it? I mean, that goes back to the top business requirements, and that's what we're gonna walk through a short one here about the whys, but what are you doing, and why are you doing it? Do you really want to do it?
So in this case, these guys, this insurance company, it was just taking too long to get people up and running. So they're losing X number of minutes every day. When you're paying people by the hour, that actually eats into its cost. It's a bottom line cost. People sit down and they're not productive. And so they needed to just integrate all of that together. You'll notice that there is a why in here, because it's we want to save money, and we actually have a reasonable expectation of it. You'll notice as well that there's really no security requirement in here. They didn't come to SSO because they wanted security. They came to SSO because they wanted ease. And usually, easy and secure don't usually go together very well. So they're going about this in a way that maybe they'll end up with a technology that fits their requirements that also will allow them to increase security later. But that's not what they wanted. They didn't set out with that in mind.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for them, it was. You can see here that, they wanted to see the hard numbers. They were really, really concerned about the wake-up time within their company, and that for them was losing actual money because people couldn't go and work as quickly because of the wake-up time to get logged into all of the systems. So they said, if they can't do what they need to do for these 20 minutes of the day or half an hour of the day that they're agonizing over logging into all of these systems, then we're losing money because they're not doing their function. So that for them was the big business benefit. When they went to do the RFP, the first thing that they said were the business requirements, which we've already stated, and then also the time and the cost estimates. The big one here was they had to look at how the QA would go because of the regulations and what they were underneath. If their QA delayed them for too long, or if the QA wasn't done properly, they actually could have been under fines for not reaching the point that they had to get to. Also, they looked at the support and the training. It was a very, very, very large company. They had to get people flown all over the country. They had to get trainers trained, ready to train them. They had to take time out from people's jobs so that they could actually get the training. And it ended up being a huge cost that people, when they first looked at this and said, geez, wouldn't it be great if it didn't take 20 minutes for people to log on? The support and the training ended up being something that almost changed the mind. It was that big.
So with the technical requirements here, internally people are logging into NT. That's just what they had, and that was what they were focused on. External users were all stored in an LDAP directory. So if you're coming in externally over a website, it's all sitting there in LDAP waiting to be accessed. They needed support for a laundry list of things that are listed here, including RACF on an IBM and an Oracle database and some custom stuff. Plus, they also have the little fill-up under there that there is one system there already that they need to use Secure ID to log into. So they've got a little complication going on there.
Yeah. And actually, there were quite a number more custom. It's like reduced it for everybody, but quite a number of custom applications within the organization, which is what was causing that login delay time. There was no way they could conflate them. They needed the business logic and all those different systems, so they had to deal with the fact that they had some very, very, very strange applications and unknown proprietary login mechanisms that needed to be supported.
This is yet another example of one of those what-if situations. What if, before we'd started building 50 different customized web applications, we'd actually attempted at least to standardize on some kind of authentication infrastructure for all of them? And, it's always the 20/20 hindsight. Almost nobody can do that. because these things often grew from different departments that weren't talking to each other. But a number of times I've heard that, wouldn't it have been nice if we could have standardized on product X or on mechanism X or standard X before we did any of this so that we wouldn't have this problem that we have now. So very often people are trying to undo problems that they didn't know they were going to have because things grew organically.
Yeah, and it's funny, being around being in the field for so long, there was a time that we thought, oh gosh, in the like mid-90s, there was a hope that, oh great, now with the web and now with going forward, we can build systems right, and all the .coms, we're going to start right. None of this, crazy spaghetti, none of these multiple systems, none of lack of planning. We're going to get it right this time. And no, even in very new companies, even in companies that are using all the latest technology, you'll still find a lot of spaghetti and a lot of proprietary solutions. So it's always a dream. But this is a large U.S. company, but that's been around for a very long time. But even new companies very often have very multiple difficult proprietary applications that they need to deal with and systems that they need to deal with. The other thing, this is an insurance company, so there were also regulatory requirements that needed to get taken into consideration. So going through with the vendor, they had to ask them if they understood the regulatory requirements as well. So the vendor did have to did support that. So as you're doing your RFPs, do think about that. If you need a vendor that understands not just how to do the technology, but they may need to understand how you do your business and what's important and what regulations are required for you to be in compliance with. So don't ever let an integrator who's going to come in and try and do a solution for you get away with not understanding both your technology and your needs and your business needs as well. So the vendor that won after this RFP went out came in with, it was a hybrid technical solution. The bottom line is that there wasn't an SSO out there that would do what they needed to do. They were just too big, too difficult, had too many requirements, and no one SSO was going to fill the bill for them. Oh, do you want to talk?
Oh, yeah, all right. So the internal users, no surprises that they got a custom Gina, a custom Windows login, because that was where they were coming from. LDAP had to be supported because that was where the data was. And for web applications that internal users were using, they had a link to an SSO package that was going to provide a web front end. And they had to have special stuff done for their existing Secure ID system. They didn't have any choice. It triggered, when the system was run, it triggered using the Secure ID. So that was their only choice.
The Gina, do you know what the Gina is? The graphical login for Microsoft. It's when you hit Control-Alt-Delete, that little box that comes up, that's the Gina. So when we say that they had a custom Gina, they actually had to go in and write that box under Control-Alt-Delete. So and that was because they had to negotiate the authentication mechanisms with so many different systems that the traditional Microsoft just couldn't handle it. And yet for the Secure ID, they had to have special triggers written in on that application to trigger up into the system so that people would be warned to enter in the Secure ID information. For the external users, it was a lot easier. It turned out that a traditional SSO would work because it was all web application logins, and that those web application logins could be re-architected to support the SSO, which was good.
So the second case study, it's a different spin on the same problem in some ways. This is a large consulting company, and the project is to link a lot of stuff that's grown organically again. So there are a bunch of internal intranets distributed all over the place. They need secure access to internal-only information so that someone on the network is not going to be able to get things they're not supposed to get. And they need to be able to use their project collaboration systems across the world. Plug in your laptop, off you go.
Yeah, so because it was international and because they were doing project collaboration, and usually consulting firms with projects have all of their customers' secrets, like Anderson had all of Enron's secrets, that they have to be able to protect these across the the whole world. So it was very important that what they picked would actually be able to aggregate the information across all of those servers so that they would have a forensic trail, and they would know that, there wasn't just one server out there that had a different security model. Very often you'll find when an enterprise has a deployed security model that somebody in another country has a different security model, but they're on the basic network and the backbone, so that they become the weakest link, the flaw in the whole system, and people will always go through the simplest point. So this company actually really needed to have complete knowledge of what was going on in all the servers, as well as the SSO ease of use, so that people didn't have to keep logging in.
And you notice on this slide, I think the thing that jumps out at me first, at least in the first few things, is that you actually need to define some of the terms that you're using. So in this case, they had to step back and say, well, what do we really mean by secure access? And it's really easy to say something like that, but you have to define what it is you need in order to be able to deal with real-world products, as opposed to this magical thing that some company is promising you in 5 years. Companies promise a lot of things, but they don't usually deliver them all. So honing in on particular things that are of particular importance to the application that you're dealing with or the organization you're dealing with is really important. So defining secure access is one of the more important things in this RFP.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many RFPs go out there with just so many loosely defined terms that there's no way that a vendor could really respond to it properly in a way that you would then know that you have an implementation you're going to be happy with. So, yeah, always the hard numbers for your success, and also anything that needs to have more of a definition. And really understand for yourselves, what is secure access? What level of encryption is okay? What level of authentication is okay? You do need to think about that, or your SSO is going to not be solving your needs in the end. Again, the QA was something that was important, and the support and the training, another large company changing things. It wasn't as big a deal because it wasn't as much of a change as the insurance company, but it was still something that had to get called in for the times and for the money that it was going to cost the company overall. That's another thing that, I don't know how many people actually control their budgets or their planning for their projects, but you will see a lot of time the support training, QA time, that'll get you, way over your budget, and then you're going to be on the hook for that and be in big trouble. And a lot of times you might want to short circuit this kind of thing. You'll lose security, and if you're responsible for the security as well as your budget, you could be losing your job over this. So it's sort of the boring side of it, but it's the side that you need to really look at when you're planning out what it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, and who you want to do it for you.
So in this environment, technically, and this is again probably no surprise even if you didn't peek ahead at the slides, internationally distributed web servers, multiple domains, both, I would imagine, both DNS domains and
exactly,
NT domains, and pick a domain, there are lots of them. Custom web applications, no surprise there. Every web server known to man and then some, with the possibility of narrowing it down to 3 or 4 that you actually were going to use, and Mac clients and Windows clients. In this kind of environment, it's funny, the insurance company, it's not a big surprise that there was NT on every desk, and it was probably the same version of NT, missing all the same patches. Whereas in this environment, in a large consulting company, it's pretty much, whatever they decided they were going to buy that week, or, some customer they were working for gave them 5 Macs instead of paying them the rest of the bill, or any number of other things. And so you end up with this environment that's very, very mixed. But in actual fact, the solution here is a lot easier, because a lot of these things, because they were so mixed, were already having to play in a standards-based environment. So there's not as much of the proprietary, strange goings-on.
Yeah, and back to as you're getting your RFP ready to go for your SSO, don't forget that if you do have Mac clients, if you do have Linux clients, if you need a lot of support, make sure that the person who's going to do the integration for you understands what your actual environment is, and that you do have special needs like that. So
this proposal from a vendor, it was just one product with some installation services because of the size of the installation. And this actually fits pretty much everything they need. I mean, they were lucky that even though it seems like a more complex environment because there's so much stuff going on, it's a conceptually simpler set of problems. So it was much easier for them to go buy something off the shelf, maybe with a little customization, and get something that they actually needed and that fit the bill.
And the two examples there are just to give you an idea that, you might be able to find something off the shelf that's going to fit what you need, and you might need to do some custom work. So it's going to depending on your business. And it might not even depend on the size of the business. Probably mostly depends on the types of applications and systems that you're trying to link into the SSO.
So this is our slightly more than 10-cent summary, since it almost fills the whole slide. Know the business requirements, which we've probably said over and over again. That just comes from our experience. I mean, everything we've ever talked about and everything we've ever done, we just keep saying that because we have been bitten by it. And we're often bitten by it as consultants from customers who think they know the business requirements but didn't really think about it.
Yeah, I mean, a great example is if all you need is password synchronization, then it would be a waste of your time and money to go and get a full-blown authentication platform, maybe start using N-factor authentication and customize a lot of your applications to be able to support the new solution. I mean, that could just be so overblown. But if you sit down with a vendor who starts telling you, an integrator that starts telling you what you need rather than you going in, or how great and cool this technology is, and you really have to have this. If you think about what does your business actually need, if you have 5 passwords and they're easily synchronizable and it's going to save you time and that's all you need to do, just do that. Don't overbuy. But you need to know your business requirements first.
Completing a cost-benefit analysis, I mean, that's highfalutin words, I suppose. Even just something, just looking at it and saying, well, are we doing this because we think it's fun, or because the boss saw some product at a trade show, or are we actually doing this because we're going to get some benefit out of it? And what are our benefits going to be? And are we actually going to save money doing it, or are we going to spend a lot of money and get nothing?
Yeah, and be reasonable. Keep in mind that there's no magic bullet, there's no perfect solution, so keep your expectations in check with that. As we said before, we tried to give you a good overview for your planning so that you can decide if you want to go with SSO, what some of the major pitfalls are, and what the top technologies are. But if you're going to go forward with this, SSO 202 for you is to dig under the covers with those technologies so that you can start to understand them better.
And following on from that, when we say investigate the technologies and the vendors, when I investigate a vendor, I don't just look at their marketing literature, which actually, I'm surprised how many people really do that. I want to talk to their reference customers, because even if they're people that had no problems and consequently were blessed as a reference customer, it's still interesting to talk to people because they often let things slip. I just want to know as much as I can about how easy it's been to actually use this thing. Does it really do what the marketing literature says it does? A little bit of digging over the course of a couple of weeks can save you 6 months worth of torture. But some people like torture, so I encourage those people not to do any of that.
Right, and not just the product vendors, but also look at your systems integrators really closely as well. See if they've done SSOs before. Some people, they don't have as much experience in the area as others do. So make sure that you work with one that understands SSO, has done SSOs, understands technology, and understands your business, because you're unique.
Yeah.
Sorry. So once you understand those business requirements, actually the easy part is matching it to the technology. That's most people buy the technology first, but if you do the other pieces, you'll find that the technology falls into place. Do your RFP, build up your architecture, prototype, build, test, train, and deploy, but get it ready, and then move off the sticky pads, because you don't need the sticky yellow notes for your passwords.
Yeah, I suppose in theory we could end with saying that if the goal of the whole project is just to get rid of the sticky pads under the keyboard so that when you're doing an audit it's actually a little bit more difficult, then that would be nice, because it's getting really boring turning over keyboards.
And yeah, it is. And we left some time in here. I know people are hungry, so if you want to go to lunch, okay, but if you would like to ask questions, we left time in here because we felt that it was something that people had a lot of questions about. So.
And you're welcome to come up here and talk to us individually if you don't want to have your question repeated in front of everybody.
Yeah, so does anybody have any questions or war stories or examples? Has anybody been going through an SSO that they could share a story about?
Nobody wants to confess to it.
Okay, well,
we'll be up here for a few minutes while we pack up our bags.
We'll be up here. Thanks very much. Have a good lunch.